pulled up the actual experiment post as well, so I have it in front of me.
Okay. Hi, good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Mukesh. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. How are you doing today?
Well, it's just the start of the day here in San Francisco, so it's going quite well.
Okay. So, as we do with all our guests, could you please introduce yourself? From where did you start? What was the journey which kind of brought you to the place that you are in right now, and what do you do right now?
Yeah, I'll give you sort of the short synopsis. People who are interested in more detail can find me on LinkedIn. I have a very different kind of profile there, but you can just look me up and get into more of the finer grain details. But the long story short is I do have a PhD in higher education, organizational
So,
behavior, and
could you
management.
please introduce yourself?
Oh yes,
From where did you start? What was the journey which kind of brought you to I the think place you have
and
YouTube on, right? You'll need to probably stop that.
I'll give you sort of the short synopsis. Ooh, seems like it's playing in the background. Find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think your YouTube, you have your YouTube on, right? So if you can just
Let me shut that off. Sorry. There we go. Apologize for that. Okay, I think I
not a
fixed the
problem.
technical glitch. That was my fault. I do apologize. I thought you were asking me the question twice. It's like, well, anyway, my name is Aaron Anderson. I'm currently working at San Francisco State University for the College of Business here on the main campus in San Francisco, sort of on the western edge of the continent, with about a half a mile from the ocean. My start was in higher education. And sort of serendipitously flowed to where I am currently. And I think many people's careers, they don't always go as you thought they would, and you always end up in a place, I think, at least if you're ambitious. And one of my life philosophies is to take advantage of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. You find yourself, and at least I do, in a place that I never could have predicted. And the position I'm currently in is Director of Strategic Organizational Initiatives, working directly for our Associate Dean, which essentially means I'm working on a wide array of different projects that don't usually come into any one person's plate or responsibilities. Act sort of like the Associate Dean's brain, think about it a little bit, strategize as to which direction to head, and then go that way. So anywhere from germination of new ideas to execution and changing out old ideas and then reinventing the way forward and trying to make things new again. Shortly, I grew up on the other side of the continent in Connecticut. I went to the University of Connecticut for my undergraduate degree. I have a degree in mathematics. I taught high school math for a little while. Then I went to Indiana University and earned a master's in college student personnel administration. And I worked in the residence halls for a little while doing leadership development, working with college students. I enjoyed the college experience. Essentially, I never left. And then I earned my PhD from the University of Michigan in 2003 with an emphasis on understanding resistance to change, because if there's one thing I know for sure is there's a lot of resistance to change in organizational life, and I wanted to understand that from a very positive perspective so that I could make change happen in a more effective way. And so here I am.
And so I would like to go a little earlier as well. So what kind of a person were you when you were growing up?
I was... Well, that's a good question. Nobody
So there is a reason why.
I like that question.
So there is a reason.
As a kid, I was an athlete, and I still am. So I used to run track and cross country, and I think that it sort of shaped who I was for a great long time. Actually, I've been a runner since 1979, which is longer than many people have been around. And I still run every morning. preferring to hit the trails through the parks and rather than run on asphalt or concrete. And I do ride my bicycle to work every day. I've been riding a bike since I was a little boy. I had a paper route, so I used to get on my bicycle every morning when I was 12 and 13 and deliver papers at 4:30 in the morning. And I think that's a good start for a kid. You get responsibility. You learn how to be punctual, on time every day. You have to go collect money to pay for the newspapers that you deliver, and you earn your way. And then you have a little bit of capital to play with, mostly spent on comic books and candy, at least until I got a little bit older. And then I started saving for tuition for college and that kind of thing. So I want to say I don't think I was overly ambitious. I'm not like an A-plus student. I didn't shoot for Stanford or Harvard as an undergrad student. I went to the University of Connecticut because I wanted to run cross-country for them. Plus, I loved the campus, and it was a beautiful place to be. And those of you who followed college basketball know that we won the national champions this year, both in the men's and the women's categories for NC2A basketball. So that's kind of exciting. But as a kid, I would say I had a lot of determination and stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah, because the reason why I asked this question to you more specifically was the fact that I wanted to understand what kind of a person does it take to do certain things that you have done, which will come to right now. So first of all, congratulations on winning the mixed prize. So how does it feel having won the hackathon?
Yeah, I'm one of I think it's 10 people that won the prize, and I was surprised to learn that I was included in such great company. And the recognition is what you get, and then there's no. It's not like winning the Academy Awards where you accept an Oscar and you say and walk down the red carpet and say, "Oh my goodness, aren't I wonderful?" and get to say an acceptance speech. But
so why don't you do one right now?
What's
Your
that?
Acceptance speech.
I can do an acceptance.
Why don't you give an acceptance speech right now?
Members of the mix, Gary Hamill, Chris Grams, and a whole mess of other people, as well as recognize the other contributors that won the prize as well. Some great people in the mix. And here's the astonishing thing, because I know that the title of this broadcast is pushing beyond the obvious. It's like, to me, it's fascinating to find a community of people who are thinking along the same lines, trying to reinvent management from around the world. So it seems to me that it's a common problem and very obvious and sitting in front of us, but it's going to take all of us together to collaborate and fix what's broken with management today. So
I totally understand with you. So I am also a fellow contributor at Mix, and that's how I got to know that you won the Mix prize. And so before we move forward, why don't you tell us what exactly was the entry? What do you do, and what did you do to have such an honor?
Yeah, I mean, you can find this. The title of the hack, as it were, is working in plain view, using a wiki, social media to broadcast as you work. And so the genesis for this was, I've been posting for a while on the Management Innovation Exchange. We should probably say what the mix means because people get confused. Mix is an acronym for Management Innovation Exchange, and it was started by Gary Hamill years ago, but I'm not sure exactly what year that was. But the only reason I got involved with the mix was because I saw a post by Gary Hamill inviting people to participate, and this is when it was relatively young. There weren't a whole lot of people on there, and it was a way to participate in a global conversation asynchronously with a wide array of people who were sort of thinking along the same lines, which I found to be very fun, enjoyable, and fascinating. And so I have a lot of posts. Actually, this is not my first post. I've been posting on just the regular Mix platform, a lot of hacks, and And I'm one of the very few people that's actually posting from a higher education perspective. So the other layer to this is I actually teach a course called Managing Organizational Change in the Executive MBA program at San Francisco State University. So it's not just from a higher education perspective, but I'm thinking along the enterprise of how we deliver education and how that might improve things. So, and then a lot of what happens in higher education is the business sector is always trying to say, here's how we do it in business. Why doesn't education do it this way? Well, I'm flipping that, and I say, well, here's how we do it in education. Why doesn't business do it this way? So, because there's a lot of pressure, and especially as they're shrinking resources for people to say, let's run a college like a business, but a college is not a business. It's not scalable, and if you have more students, it doesn't get cheaper; it gets more expensive to deliver. So we have to think about things a little bit differently, and then how are we going to accomplish the aims of what these organizations are built to do? Anyway, so there's a lot more posts and layers to the history of my interaction on the Mix. This one just happened to be the first one that gets the kind of recognition. And it started as a very small idea about my job. And I didn't even think about it because I started doing this before I even wrote the post. I was appointed, and I was the acting director for graduate business programs at our downtown campus, which we have down on Market Street on Powell, basically right at the cable car turnaround. There's a small campus that we have where we deliver our graduate programs. And my term came up, and the dean moved me back to the main campus, and she said, why don't you take on this brand new role? And it's not often that you get to start a brand new position with really no sort of model to shape the job. And I thought to myself, I said, well, why would I invent this job by myself? Because I'm just one person with one brain. And the dean wanted me to take on this challenge, and I said, well, why don't we open this up? And so, and I didn't write this post until about 8 months in, and then the actual contest came out about a year into this, and so the post itself has been refined a couple of times before the final entry was made, but the experiment started a year before, and I didn't start the experiment with the idea of let me write a post. I started an experiment from a very real problem, which is I've got a full-time job. It's never been done before. How should I do it? And I thought, why don't I just open source it? And so I created a wiki using the Google sites.google.com, and because they're free and it doesn't cost any money, it's relatively easy to use. And I always say, if you can open up a Microsoft Word document, you're overqualified to build a wiki. Lots of people get a little freaked out about doing Google Sites, and they say, well, I don't know how to do it, I don't want to break it. I said, well, that's because you're used to using a Microsoft product, and you overthink it. And you don't have to overthink it. It's a lot easier to use. And the best thing about the Google Sites, I find, is that if you don't like where you are today, you can go back to the last point where you liked it and revert back to the older version, which is, I think, very handy, especially if you're going to open source things and allow anyone to edit. So if anybody can edit my wiki, I have to be comfortable, letting go of the control and then allow anyone to edit. But the comfortability goes in there. It's like if you, Mukesh, go in and edit my wiki and I hate everything you do, I can go back to yesterday and revert. And then it might make you angry because you spent all this time changing out my wiki. But at least I, as the owner of the wiki, have complete control over that. So, but the genesis of the idea was, well, I have a new job. I'm just one person. I've never heard of this job before on a college campus. So why don't I ask the world for help? And so I put a post. I created the wiki first, and then and it started out open to everyone, and then I
So when
put
you
it
say open to everyone, it is open to not only your college campus, but also open to the world.
the world. Anybody. It's right now closed. I should say I closed it because there's confidential things on there that people probably shouldn't know, and I got into a little bit of trouble by doing this because colleges and universities have a complete aversion to bad news, so they don't like
So which
people
so,
to.
so which organization doesn't have complete aversion to bad news?
It's an allergy, I think, but we have to get over that allergy to. We can't be allergic to failure, and that's part of the problems with organizational life. Is if you believe the phrase "fail fast and fail often," which we hear around here in Silicon Valley, it's made famous by Facebook, among others. Um, we can't be afraid to let the world know what those failures are, because if you allow the world to participate on your platform and help you develop your products or develop your job, which is what I was trying to do, then you have to be willing to show people what doesn't work in addition to what does work. It can't always be about best practices. Here's how we did it. Here's how you can do it and replicate it at your place. You also want to be willing to share what didn't work. And you might actually be in the middle of trying something out and it just falls and apart, explodes, whatever, and you get into trouble. With the higher level administrators who say maybe you shouldn't have let the world know that you
So
made this
so
mistake.
so,
So, but
so
here's
just
here's
1 second before.
sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. So before you go on, the first question is that how did your management allow you to do something like that? So the moment someone tries to do something like this, which is totally out of the ordinary, the first thing is that no, stop. How did
So
you overcome that resistance?
yeah, so I didn't ask permission, and
Okay.
I have not had to ask for forgiveness because I was working in plain view, and working in plain view. Uh, I think allowed me, and people didn't see it. Here's the interesting thing. It's like just because you create a wiki and you open it up to the world, how do you get eyeballs to your wiki to help work on it with you? And that was one of the lessons I learned. Is just because you start a wiki doesn't mean anybody's going to come and play with you in your sandbox to help build the castle. It's got to be compelling for the individual. So working in plain view, I posted this link to the wiki on my LinkedIn site, which auto feeds to my Twitter feed and then bounces to my Facebook feed. And then I also posted on the Yammer location, which is a Microsoft product in which we use here, very small presence here at SF State. But those of you not familiar with Yammer, Yammer is an intranet for people who work at the same location, which I think of it like Facebook for your company or your organization. I like it because I know that the people that are on it are working at the same place I am, and so I can get immediate feedback from people that I'm working with, even though they're spread out over a fairly big space, and the campus has got 30,000 students. So I posted the wiki there, but nobody came. So here I did not ask for permission. I didn't say, hey, can somebody, is it okay if I post a wiki? No, I just did it. The downside there is nobody noticed, right? So I didn't get a lot of help, but I did have a few people who jumped on with me, asked for permission to edit. But the other flip side of that is it takes energy to participate, right? So you can make the invitation. You have to create a compelling reason as to why people want to play with you in your sandbox, help you build a castle. Then they have to have bandwidth to help you build the castle. So and the people that actually participated on the wiki with me didn't spend a whole lot of time helping me build the castle. So a lot of it was just me working on building out the job and the position in plain view, and people would periodically chime in and see and then only occasionally did somebody help me build the castle. But I did get some feedback, and anytime I made, this is the interesting thing, is when I was doing things well, it was quiet. There wasn't a whole lot of feedback. When I was doing things poorly, or there was a mistake, there were the alarm bells went off, people started, yelling at me. My boss would come down the hallway and say, no, you can't post that, and then I'd be like, well, why is it that the mistakes attract more attention? So to me, that's interesting from both an organizational behavioral perspective, but also from the aspect of trying to get things done at work.
No, but what is more interesting is the fact that if the mistakes are getting noticed, that means that people are actually coming to your site and reading what you're putting up.
Yeah, so you're in the public view. You should never write anything you don't want to have the New York Times pick up and say, this guy's an idiot, So, you're not going to be making posts that are foolish and stupid. You're trying to be thoughtful in an honest broker way. You're really trying to build the job, the castle. I'll just call it, let's go with the castle metaphor. I'm building a castle from the foundation up, because there was no foundation. So that has to start with the foundation, which tends to be the platform we're trying to build this on, and then we're using different tools, the Google site, the different social media aspects, Twitter, Yammer, Google sites for the wiki, and then older tools like email conversations and walking down the hall and talking to people who happen to be closer, or people who are a little bit more vested in what I'm trying to accomplish. My boss in particular, but there was one time where I posted something which I didn't know shouldn't have been posted, because it was sent to me by another person in a very public forum. What had happened was this person shouldn't have posted it to that public forum because it wasn't vetted completely. And then I actually heard from my boss that the president of the university was not happy that this was posted, and so I ended up in a little bit of hot water, and it's through no real fault of my own, but I was able to take it down. So here, that's another one of the lessons in the contest-winning post, which is when you're working in plain view, you get to identify your mistakes quicker and then fix them in a much more swift fashion. Because if you're not in plain view, how do you know you're screwing up, right? So if you're screwing up, you want to fix that as fast as possible. And so if nobody is paying attention, you have one problem. But if people are paying attention and you know that they're going to identify your mistakes, you get to learn your mistakes faster and then resolve them in a quicker way. So that's a levered advantage in my view for working in plain view.
I totally agree with you. And I was talking to Karen Hurt from letsgrowleaders.com, and she was talking about trust and openness and honesty being the most important levers for a leader to be most effective. And I think by working in plain view, you've actually built in all of these right into your role and the way you work. So how did people who work for you respond to this entire thing? And the second point that I would also like to understand from you is that now that you've been running this experiment for almost about 400 odd days, 1.5 years if I'm not wrong. So if you have to look at the past experience and kind of narrow it down to 1 or 2 moments which actually were make or break points, like for example, days when you rethought as to whether you should continue doing this, or the day you thought that what I'm doing is absolutely the right way to do it. So, and what were your thoughts around those?
Yeah, I mean, I had probably the after I had made that big mistake that was noticed by the university's president, I thought I had some doubts, because trust is reciprocal, right? So you don't get trust if you don't give trust, but trust has to be given in advance of experience. Otherwise, we're mistrusting everyone, and that's no way to operate and live. And I always say this to my students: trust is it takes a lifetime to earn and a moment to break, and it's almost impossible to earn back if it's violated, unless you act accordingly. So, you know, that there was that point where I got into trouble for doing the posting, and that's when I decided to switch it from open to closed, and then only allowing those people more close to me access. And I was like, well, it's still open to people locally, but it's not open to the world. It's at least not as big a mistake or an embarrassment. It's not, mistakes aren't bad. It's the embarrassment that carries the gravitas of what makes it a bigger problem. If you're embarrassed by your mistakes, and that's, I just thought about that, I should probably change my post to add the element of embarrassment. So who's embarrassed by your post? You, the individual who wrote it, or me, the university, the upper level, you know, administrators, the higher level, let's call it the CEO, the highest level. And we have a problem, right? Because we're embarrassed by mistakes, and there is a long history in the industry of trying to cover up mistakes or avoiding mistakes, which lead you to even bigger and worse problems. Let's look. You can look at GM, which is in General Motors, which is in hot water right now for ignoring their ignition problem. If somebody, you know, if the ignition problem was identified years ago, which it was, and somebody just said, oops, we made a mistake, we only fixed 30,000 cars, now we're talking about fixing 30 million cars, that's a much bigger problem. Had they owned up to the mistake and been less embarrassed about that mistake, they might have actually resolved this problem a long time ago and avoided a bigger calamity. So the win there is identify your mistakes early, don't be embarrassed about them, and if you are, get over that embarrassment, because it's short-lived if you fix it right away. So the thread there is trust. It's like if the trust has been violated because you made a mistake, you say, well, as an honest mistake. Now, and there's a difference between honest mistakes where you're like, well, I didn't know I was going to do this because we're going to the top of a mountain we've never been to the top of, and making mistakes like Ken Lay did with Enron, and, you know, or the credit default swap problem we have here in the United States, where nobody yet has gone to jail, but they knew they were selling bad products. You know, there's a difference, and that is reflected in their integrity levels. And so trust, integrity, embarrassment, it all weaves together to formulate how you are going to act and behave going forward. So I wasn't embarrassed by my mistake, and this gets back to your original question, which is, were there decision points? And I decided to back it down a level, not because I was embarrassed by the mistake I made, it's because I got into deep trouble for it, and the university couldn't handle the embarrassment for that mistake. And so maybe there's another post to be made, which is how to handle embarrassment, or how to minimize embarrassment. I'll have to think about that. That's kind of a raw idea. I'll have to think about that one for a little bit. But, you know, and then, but I kept going. So I was like, you know, I'm going to shut down the level of openness. So I had to sacrifice a little bit of the quality of the experiment for the sake of compensating for the embarrassment level, and turn that down, and then left it open to only a small number of players. And then I stopped broadcasting, because there's a broadcasting element here too. It's like, so you could do your work in isolation, nobody knows what you're doing, and then you have a PR problem as an employee. Nobody knows what you're doing, and everybody's asking, so Aaron, what are you doing today? Well, what do you mean? What I've got, you know, 8 hours of work plus that I've got to get done, and you just don't know because you're not paying attention. Well, that's part of the problem, but also part of the problem is we have new tools, these social media tools that you can use to broadcast your work. And I got another question about this a while back. So, you know, did you spend more time broadcasting than you did actually doing work? Well, that's the wrong question, right? So the right question is, how do you make broadcasting the accomplishments and the work you're doing a part of the work? So broadcasting isn't about boastfulness, and so I'm not trying to boast that I got some work done. I'm trying to tell you that I finished something and I need your input. And I would like, if you're willing, and it's like corralling volunteers really when I was conducting this, it's like nobody's job description says you must participate in the wiki or you will be fired, you know. It's like put it out there, which means all you're doing is getting willing players in your sandbox. So that, you know.
So one very interesting thing that my perception from the entire experiment that you have done is that this is probably the closest that I have seen someone being able to work in real time. So let me just try and explain what I mean by working in real time. So
Sure.
One of the has been, you know, real-time enterprises and how businesses need to make decisions and move at lightning speed in order to stay competitive and relevant in their organization. And how do you do that? There are a lot of silos in organizations. One department doesn't talk to the other. There are people within a department don't talk to each other, don't understand what each other is doing. And here you are running an experiment where you're working in plain view using wikis and tools which are kind of common and normally available for every organization that wants to use them. So just imagine what happens when an organization actually starts working, the entire organization actually starts working the way that you are doing, which is that if there are no, so everyone knows what's happening in the organization. Any mistake that happens in the organization will be amplified and can be corrected really, really fast. You don't spend time wasting giving status updates and doing meetings, meeting after meeting of talking around and giving status updates. Everyone knows if you're stuck. Everyone knows that you're stuck. So wherever the ideas can flow in from wherever the ideas are, and all of this put together have a compounding effect on the entire idea, and the entire idea and this compounding effect can actually make an enterprise real time, which is responding to every opportunity, responding to every mistake or error which needs to be corrected and which needs to be learned from. And I find that to be really fascinating. So have you, during the last 1.5 years of having done this experiment, thought around how do you scale this to an enterprise level, or someone has reached out to you wanting to explore how can this be done at an enterprise level?
No, I wish I had an example, but I don't. Nobody has sort of adopted this practice wholesale for the entire operation. And I would like to say that, or I would like to believe that it's a compelling idea that everybody should try it. But I think that the mindset, I would call it sort of old millennium thinking, which is very proprietary and closed. And the new millennium thinking in the sort of management 2.0 is not closed. It's the opposite. It's wide open, transparent, visible to everyone, even your customers. So if you think about it, the compelling reason for this, especially for a company that's selling something that you have to buy off a shelf, if you're trying to improve your product, in a university, the product is our graduates, right? We're trying to produce viable students who are employable in the workforce. That's not like getting a bottle of Coca-Cola off your shelf and tasting it and saying, "Oh, they changed the formula, it sucks, and I'm not buying any more." You know, if you remember the old Coke versus the new Coke, the classic and that kind of thing, when they introduced the new Coke, everybody hated it. Imagine if they had social media back then when they tried that. This is a long time ago. But if they had social media, they might have found out that their new formula sucked in Atlanta, which is the headquarters for Coca-Cola, a lot sooner than they could have avoided this whole global rollout of new Coke versus the classic Coke, and they might have saved a lot of money. You know, shareholders would have been happier.
Money and PR.
Yeah, and the customer as well. So openness, transparency, and the fluidity of conversation is the new millennium. So that's what I try to say. It's like, here you go, try it. But I can't. I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make the horse drink. I'm not the
Right.
CEO of a company. And I think that startups are much better at this, right? So if you're here in San Francisco, we have a lot of small startups. It's like 5 people, 3 people in a garage. If you think of that as a corollary for doing it in a broader way, they actually do work openly and in a transparent way because they're working 24/7 on this really great idea that they think is going to change the world. And they're all people are doing all things in real time together, and they make decisions together, and they're sharing, and they're constantly. They might be even in a small space. The communication is constant, so they're not having weekly meetings where we all report. So what I found
So I
out
think
is, and I use this with my team, I use a different wiki, not the one that I use to construct the job. I use an internal wiki for my team, and the win there is everybody shows up already knowing what's going on, and we don't have a lot of conversations about what are you doing, and like those reporting meetings, which I think are a complete waste of money. If you look at a meeting and you add up the salaries around the table and multiply the number of hours you're at the meeting, you think, well, was the ROI on this meeting that good? What's your return on your investment? And most of the time, if people are just talking blah, 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 then they're looking under their table, texting their friends, saying, this is the most boring meeting I've ever been to. Couldn't we have just gotten this in an email? Well, if you're using social media and a wiki and you're transparent about your operation and you make posts in real time, the onus is on the meeting participants to have explored those areas, to know what's going on. Then you spend your time thinking about solving the problems that face you right now. And even better is if you make a post, and this actually did happen while I was building out the job, I had colleagues around the university who were participating, or at least watching. I don't know what the level of participation, but I put out a list of certain items, and there were some mistakes in the list, and so it's self-correcting. One of the other people from the other side of campus said, Aaron, I hope you don't mind, there's a mistake here, I changed it for you. Well, even better, I didn't have to solve this problem. They saw my mistake and fixed it for me. I was like, thank you.
Exactly.
You saved my ass, and you fixed my mistake. And I didn't even have to ask them to do it. And so you're like, well, geez, that's the way it should work. So I think if this experiment were scaled out across a whole organization, then the win would be just enormous, and the ROI would be exponential, and people would enjoy it.
That's and I also believe that this is something that probably should start from startups which are like 20, 25 people and above. That's where probably all these connections kind of start breaking, and you need status updates in order to know what's happening in your organization. So let's switch gears a little bit here. I know that from my personal experience, that whenever you go on or embark on such an experiment, it actually in some way changes you as a person. So during the last 1.5 years that you've spent on this experiment, how has this changed you as a perception, your outlook towards life and work?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because I forget what I was like before I did it, right? I would have to think back. For me, it's changed my work practice in a big way because now, for me, I work. I don't work on my laptop to save documents to my hard drive. I work on Google Docs, on Google Sites, and social media almost all the time now. Because what that means is instead of creating a proprietary document, so it's a shift in thinking, right? Turn the switch from proprietary to transparent. And one of the things I always tell my students is proprietary wisdom is neither. Um,
Mm.
because you have to share, right? At least in an educational environment. And a good example of this is Tesla Motor Company. I don't know if you're familiar with Tesla,
Yes.
but they just opened up all of their patents and said, "Here, take them." And I think that's the new way. Patents are the old way to make money. Openness is the new way, and we don't know exactly how that's going to work out for Tesla. But for me, instead of building out proprietary content that is closed, I build on platforms that can be made completely transparent to the world. So I can, in every document and every element that I'm working in now, I can turn on the permission level to open it up to the entire world. So that doesn't mean I start with it open. I actually start with it just me looking at it. But then I invite others to participate, my boss, my team, and then if we decide, then we can open it up to the world and then invite everybody to take a look. And I think that's the next level. I haven't pushed out a lot of content after I got slapped around for my big mistake. I dialed back the openness level a bit, and then at some point I think we're going to be brave and less embarrassed about our content, and we're willing to share it, and we'll just open it up. And so with everything on a platform that is in the cloud and shareable, I can actually share all the way back to the very beginning or as far back as I want to. And then you can, as somebody who's across the world in India, can look at it if you want. And you can drill back in. You may go back to the very first idea and say, well, you missed this one and you should bring it all the way up over to here, by the way. And your product then is like, why'd you miss this? It's obvious to me. Well, it's not obvious to me because I've been looking at it for so long. It's nice to have fresh eyes taking a look at it. And then we invent the way forward together. So that's one key way that I've changed is I build everything in the cloud, and that way, and it can be switched to open whenever that is deemed okay to do. The other way is you just have to be willing to change, and that's this willingness to change is hard to master because you spend a lot of time building something. You're like you got ownership on that, and you're like, hey, what do you mean you didn't like it? You know. So this is what I find is like if you're open and you're open it up to the world, you have to be ready for the trolls to come in who absolutely hate you or hate what you're doing, and listen and be willing to adjust, which is one of the things I wrote about in the book I have out, which is it's called Engaging Resistance: How Ordinary People Successfully Manage Change. It's through the Stanford University Press, so you can take a look at that. But the reality is resistance is a necessary part of life. Like gravity to stand, if you have no gravity, you can't stand up. So you must have resistance, and clear evidence that you're changing or is the presence of resistance. It's a natural part of the whole process. And negativity sometimes gets laced with anger, and it's hard to understand through text and just documents. But when somebody's typing in all caps, you know, they're going, bam, and they hit their send button, they feel like they're anonymous, and so they come at you with a little bit more anger. You have to be willing to back it down and not take it personally, and then look for the good in every post. So you got to have a little bit of Teflon skin. But then you never know, because it's the people who resist the most care the most, right? So they're the ones who are going to be most animated about why you shouldn't do it a certain way. They can be if you do a little mental judo on them, I'm not talking about the Jedi mind trick here. You know, these are not the droids you're looking for. This is actually listening to what people are saying and then adjusting what you're doing based on what their feedback. Then they can see that your actions were affected by their input. They feel good about it. So it's good action in the wake of a possibly negative interaction that allows you to move forward in a positive direction and then turn that person into an ally for you. So that's hard to do because it means you're always moving in different directions, and it's much more serendipitous. So, but to me, I find if you're building out something new and you've never been to the top of the mountain, sometimes you have to back down the mountain a little bit to go a different way.
Right. So I know we are kind of nearing the end of the time that we've got here. So I'd like to explore just one more thing before we kind of move towards the close. Right. So if someone wants to try out this experiment in their organization, what are the probably 2 or 3 most critical things that you would advise them to definitely do, without which the experiment can't succeed, and 2 or 3 things which definitely avoid doing, which if they get into probably might put their entire experiment in jeopardy?
What not to do? That's a hard one. I mean, I know what you should do. You should just try it, right? Because you never know until there's an inherent action bias in organizational life. If you're not doing something, you're not moving forward. So the action bias in organizational life presents a sort of resource coagulation if you at the front of the spear. So but then a mistake is always paying attention to the tip of the spear and not paying attention to the back side of your operation. So that's one mistake. So, but you have to do something. Even if you feel like you shouldn't do something, you have to take action, because then what you do is you engage what Carl Weick would call the double interact, and then you get feedback from the people that are acting with you or against you in resistance. Unless you move, then everything is latent, and you're just sort of waiting for something to happen, and that's the worst possible thing. Just waiting for something to happen is just frustrating. It's like there's difference between thinking things through and then waiting for something to happen. And good process is always about trying to think it through positively, but if you're going to some place you've never been, you don't know what kind of obstacles are going to be in your way until you start walking that direction. And you never know what tools you're going to need either. So I would just say, number one, get started. So you have to put something in motion and act on it. Don't avoid the mistake of disregarding the back end, and pay attention to the front end. But then there's another thing, is like you can actually direct resources to create action in another way. So you can actually act in multiple directions. You don't have to be just doing one thing. As a matter of fact, I don't know anybody in organizations that are only working on one thing. Yeah, I mean, I can't come up with that model unless you're. I used to work in a factory, and so I mean, even then you're still thinking about multiple things. So where you place the resources is critical and important. So remember, and that's like Pfeffer and Solanchik say, it's resource dependency model, which is you get the behavior you reward, right? This is old theory. And if you have resources that you can distribute, this is another post that I'm currently working on, the hackathon for, I forget what the title of the hackathon is. One of my hacks, I have 2 hacks that were advanced to the next phase, is spreading out the resources. So there's a difference between, this is a mistake that you can make, is giving people all of the responsibility and zero authority. And the authority comes with budgetary decision-making capacity. It's like, I give you, Mukesh, all the responsibility to build out this site, And then you say, well, how much money do I have to do this? And say,
Right.
well, just tell us what you need, and then we'll get you what you need, I think. And then the first time you go, so, well, geez, I don't know what my budget is. I have all of the responsibility with none of the authority. And so what am I supposed to do? So another mistake is giving people the responsibility without the corresponding authority to make decisions to move it forward, and you're stifling the capacity of your operation by killing your energy and the people because they got no resources to make the action happen. So I'm working on that hack right now, but
Okay.
I think that's enough. I probably talked too long anyway, but
Yeah. No. I think I've had a very interesting chat, and I'm sure that the audience is going to love this as well. Before we kind of wrap up, I just have the same question that I ask almost all my guests on the show. Since the show is called Pushing Beyond the Obvious, right? So, is there something that is so plain obvious for people from outside, but which leaders and organizations don't see? You know, that which, yeah. So, is there something like that you've come across?
well, I was, because you had told me you were going to ask this question. I've been kind of parked it in the back of my brain, but here's the obvious thing. The obvious thing is, I don't know. Do you use Facebook at all?
Yeah.
And you work in an organization. How many people use Facebook in your organization?
Everyone, almost
Everyone, right? So this is the obvious thing. It's like, so what do we think of in terms of organizational life is the value of Facebook at work? It's negative, right? So if you think about this, it's like from the managerial standpoint, corporations and organizations continuously block access to social media because they think it's a time sink and a waster. So the obvious thing to me is to switch your thinking about social media as a value add and necessary to organizational life. So if everybody is familiar with using Facebook with their friends and their family and continuously updating their, people posting what they're having, and you even have a picture of a cup of coffee on your Google site. I saw that. It's nice. Looks like a good cup of cappuccino right there. We'll have to have a cappuccino next time we're in the same place together. So,
definitely.
But people are becoming natural users of social media. The obvious problem is, how do you operationalize it in a very positive to add value to your business? And if you go to my experiment, that's it. Try it. So that's it.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Aaron. Before we kind of wind up, can you please tell our audience where they can find you?
Yeah, the best thing to do is probably look me up on LinkedIn, or come by, have a coffee, and you could send me a message or whatever. And I'm very responsive. But I have to say, I don't want a flood of invitations to connect in the first circle in LinkedIn. Because my philosophy on this is, my integrity is as good as my first circle of contacts, and so I usually reserve my first circle of contacts on LinkedIn for people I have met in person, or at least like we're doing through a Google Hangout. And I've actually had conversations with people on Google Hangouts with people from around the world, and it's very wonderful. The world has shrunk, and if you use tools that are free and available, you don't have to avoid one another anymore. It was just natural for us to connect in this way for me, and so you can find me that way through LinkedIn, or send me an email through runner@sfsu.edu. However you want to connect, I'm just about everywhere. You just Google search me. And,
so I'm also going to.
if you want to connect, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, we have to have coffee.
Of course. So thanks a lot for spending time with me, Aaron. I'm gonna link your post on Mix and maybe your Twitter handle when I'm gonna post this, so that if people want to connect, they can directly connect you with on Twitter. I will not post the LinkedIn, so if people really want to find you on LinkedIn, let them go and do a little bit of work and find out, and then maybe connect with you. So thanks a lot for spending time and talking to us about your very interesting experiment.
Yeah, and you can post the YouTube link as well, and
Yeah, I will do that as well.
I think it'll be fun because if it weren't for the Mix, you and I would have never met, and so we'll tweet at the Mix and let them know this happened.
Yes, of course.
All right,
So,
nice to meet you.
Thank you.
And hello to your